Hello and welcome to Hastings Question Time. Welcome, you're very welcome to join us this evening. We're delighted to have you here. And now I would like to introduce our panelists. So panelists, please, could you turn on your cameras? So first of all, I would like to introduce our panel to you. We have Sally Ann Hart, who is the MP for Hastings and Rye, Councillor Keith Glazier, who is the leader of East Sussex County Council, Councillor Colin Fitzgerald, the Deputy Leader of Hastings Borough Council. Good evening, Colin. Very pleased to see also Graham Peters, who is the Vice Chair of the South East Local Enterprise Partnership and the Chairman of Team East Sussex. And then we also have Steve Mannering, who is the Director of Hastings Voluntary Action and the Acting Chair of the Hastings Community Hub. And then lastly, two further guests, Greg Wilcox, who is a retired GP, who is also currently back in the fold, helping at one of our vaccination centres. Pleased to see you, Dr. Wilcox. And Dawn Dublin, who is the Director of Hastings Urban Enterprises. So welcome, panel. Over to you, Kim.
This is our first ever broadcast event at Hastings HEART. So we're hoping it will be a fascinating discussion about some of your issues around COVID-19. We also want to stimulate some good debate about how we in Hastings and St Leonard's might start the recovery process for our town. So please take part in our chat room. The button is at the bottom of your Zoom screen where you can make live comments and take part in polls throughout the event. Some of your comments will be taken forward during the programme, but please let's keep it a safe space without any heckling. Shall we just say a quick hello to our chat room?
Hi. Hi guys, hi, lovely to be here. I'm Rachel and we've got Trina here as well. We can't quite get our cameras on, but it's lovely to have you all with us this evening. And we'll be jumping in with some really great comments that we get in the chat and some of the poll data as well. So we will be listening, we're here, and thank you for joining in.
That's great. Okay, so without further ado, let's go straight to the first question, and that's over to you, Alistair.
Thanks, Kim. So this question is about vaccination testing. It's a question from Russell Hall from the Old Town in Hastings. I'm sorry, the first question is actually from Teresa Hodge from St Leonard's. And the question is, what support is in place to enable people living alone to access a COVID test if they can't get to a test centre and don't feel confident to test themselves at home? How about you, Steve Mannering, Director of Hastings Voluntary Action? I wondered if you'd like to comment on that one.
Yeah, thanks very much. I don't know if you remember right at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, the World Health Organization was asked, what's the way out of this? And the answer came in 3 words, which is test, test, test. And over time, the availability of testing has become more widely available. We are looking to a point in Hastings where asymptomatic testing will become available. It is important that that's available in areas of risk and started in relation to workplaces, and we're hoping to develop that further forward. Teresa's question, I think, is very, very specific, which is what support's available for people to actually get to testing. I want to be saying that the privilege I have is to be helping to work with partners to support people to do whatever it is that they need to do during this pandemic, whether that is getting prescriptions, getting testing, getting access to things. And we're really pleased to be working with organisations like Hastings Community Transport, who offer free and accessible transport to people to access testing, to the HEART Roadrunners service, who can organise availability of transport to people to support them in this process. Moving on to the issue of vaccines, we're finding that people's issues around the vaccine aren't necessarily to do with the vaccine itself. It's having been shielded for a long period of time. It might be going out, it might be, what will it be like? Will I have to queue? Will it be crowded? And the experience so far has been really, really positive. But clearly, we want to make sure that the right sort of support is available. We know that lots of people in Hastings are not car owners, do not have access to independent transport, and perhaps do not feel that public transport can meet their needs. And so we would want, through HEART and through community transport, to be making sure that people have access to what they need when they need it, in order to help them transport themselves towards testing or vaccinations.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Steve. Kim, I think you've got another question about testing as well, which we've got a response from Daryl Gale, the Director of Public Health.
Yes, I have. Can I just alert the operators of the show that the spotlight is still on Alistair and not on the speaker? It's on the speaker now, that's me. Okay, so the second part of that question is, when will asymptomatic community testing be available to everyone in Hastings, and how will it operate? This was a question from Russell Hall from the Old Town in Hastings. And unfortunately, Daryl Gale, East Sussex County Councillor, Director for Public Health, could not be here tonight, so I've got a written response for him, and then we'll throw it open to the panel if that's all right. And this is the response from Daryl Gale. We are working on launching our asymptomatic testing programme in March. This is likely to include a mix of community testing sites and bookable testing appointments in selected community pharmacies, thus giving more people across our county more convenient access to where they live or work. For now, our focus has been on testing for priority staff groups that are critical to supporting communities responding to the pandemic, and those who can't work from home or who are at higher risk of infection and transmission. NHS staff, teachers and those working in care homes have been accessing regular asymptomatic, sorry, I keep jumping over that word, testing for a number of months. Can we throw that open now to the panel? Would anyone like to also talk about asymptomatic testing? Sorry.
And I think the reason for that, Kim, if I may add, which is that I understand that the government has now announced a scheme to enable asymptomatic testing for business, businesses which employ more than 50 or more people who are employed at places that they can't work from home. So I'm just wondering what steps there are to engage the business community in all of that process, and what people's views about it were. Perhaps, Graham, if you'd like to, I don't know if you'd like to comment, perhaps from your point of view, in terms of interrelations with the business community. And then we've got hands up from Keith Glazier and Sally Ann Hart. So I'll take them first, ladies first, and then go to Keith. So Graham,
okay. I've become a lady, have I? So I go first.
No.
Thank you. Thanks, Alistair. That's super. We will obviously, as soon as the details of this are announced and how it's working out, we'll obviously engage with all of our networks, including the locally the Hastings Chamber of Commerce and the other groups that we deal with, to make sure that we've reached all of the 50+ employers in town. And I would hope that we might be able to, as time goes by, to percolate down to smaller businesses. I mean, obviously that's a government initiative and they will need to do the funding. The other thing I'd like to mention at this stage is that Team East Sussex is engaging with the Psychology Department of Sussex University, Daryl Gale of Wave Leisure, Sonia Blizzard of Beaming, and various other people to devise a guide which we're provisionally titled as Healthier Homeworking. We realise that there are huge stresses on people who are working from home and who aren't used to it. And it's important to try and get help out to them as the world evolves and changes. I know it's been going on for some time, but it's still important to get that out and get people understanding. Thanks, Alistair.
Well, Sally Ann, right, let's turn to you next.
Thank you, Alistair. I agree with everything that Graham said there. And I think the asymptomatic testing is really important in order to give people confidence and business confidence. And that's really essential as we go forward. I know we've got the vaccines, but there will need to be, asymptomatic testing. I know there's been questions raised about the lateral flow tests, but they've worked really well with our NHS, and they can show a positive immediately, virtually immediately. And if you have a positive arising from a lateral flow test, you can then go and have a proper PCR test. And it has actually, thrown up a lot of asymptomatic positive cases, which has really protected the NHS staff and taken people out of circulation before they can infect other people.
Thanks. And Keith, you wanted to come in there as well.
Just to add that the Local Resilience Forum, on behalf of the whole of Sussex, have submitted their bid to government last evening. We expect the ministers to look at this over the weekend, and we're really hoping that early next week we will get the go-ahead. And the plan is to do a soft launch on March the 1st, working with some specific groups, and then a wider launch on the 8th of March. Of course, all of this is dependent on the ministers accepting that, and that the guidance then will be shared as soon as we have the okay from government. So it is moving, and will move at quite a pace when we get the go-ahead.
Very interesting. Thank you very much indeed for that. And we'll move quickly on, if I may. I know that there's been some polls which have been quite interesting. I'm not quite sure how those are being shared, but we can certainly highlight those when the time comes. So there's been lots of interaction response from the audiences about some of those questions. Okay, second question is actually also down to me, which is about vaccinations again. And this is a question from Ian Bunch of the Ridge in Hastings, which says, a friend of mine has a severe and debilitating allergy to rosin and associated products. She wants to get a vaccine as soon as possible, but no one will clarify if the vaccine might trigger a reaction. Prior to calling her GP, she sent a letter with no response. She then called her GP, who referred her to 119, who in turn referred her to 111, who then suggested she contact her GP. The final advice was to go get the vaccine and ask the doctors there. So the latest Ian's question is, are there at all test stations that in the Hastings area suitably qualified staff who can advise on this important serious condition? And also, why isn't this information easily available online or via the GP? And perhaps, Greg, if you'd like to answer that one.
Yes, firstly, my sympathies for the difficulties, I think, surrounding some of the concerns regarding particularly allergy with the Pfizer vaccine. It's much less of an issue with the AstraZeneca vaccine that's come along second. But with the Pfizer vaccine, there have been a lot of concerns. I'm sorry there was a problem with the GP, because most GPs should have access to the up-to-date information, which has been changing on a regular basis. And so up-to-date information is really important. So most GPs should have access to that information. But what I can say is that the vaccination centres do have clinicians who are trained, who have received the extra training to be able to advise people on the latest advice regarding who is and who isn't eligible for which particular vaccine.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. There's a rider to that question as well, which I would wonder if you might also be able to ask, which is from Penny Beale in the Old Town in Hastings, which was that are vaccinations planned to be made available from one's own surgery or from more central pharmacies? So perhaps you'd like to respond to that one as well, Greg, if you could.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, the GP-led vaccination services are one way of providing vaccination. GPs in Hastings, in particular, have worked together, and they're providing vaccines from King's Church, which is just opposite the Conquest on the Ridge. There are large vaccination services in most counties, and one of my neighbours has been over to the Brighton Racecourse only a couple of days ago for their AstraZeneca vaccine. There's a roving service, and I am aware of a local GP who's been out to the nursing homes vaccinating those patients who can't get out of the house, or patients who are stuck in nursing homes. So that's being done. And then there are the hospital hubs, which is I've been working at up at the Conquest, where we're vaccinating those folks who work for health and social care. There aren't any current plans to move the service from the King's Church hub into practices. One of the difficulties, of course, is the nature of the vaccines themselves. They're not as easy to manage as vaccines such as the influenza vaccine. And particularly the Pfizer vaccine is a very delicate vaccine, which really has to be done in hubs. In terms of pharmacies, community pharmacies, I know in Hastings already some of them are playing an important role in COVID vaccination. I understand that the NHS is keen for more to be involved. NHS England has written to community pharmacies asking, and pharmaceutical committees, local pharmaceutical committees, asking them for expressions of interest to lead a local vaccination service. If any local pharmacies wish to apply, then they need to complete the designation form and submit this very soon, by the end of this month, to formally express an interest. So mostly it'll be happening, certainly for the folks of Hastings, in either the hospital hub for those who are working for hospital and social care, and in the King's Church for the time being.
Thank you, Greg. And if I may, just put in a little plug there, because it was already mentioned by Steve that there are transport services for those people that can't access those centres available from either Hastings Community Transport or from the Hastings Heart Network ourselves, which you should hopefully have the web address for, but I'm sure somebody can put it into the chat room. Okay, well, at this point, why don't we go over to...
Yeah, let's go over to the chat room and see if we've had any comments on the stuff that's been happening already.
Hi everyone. Yeah, we've had a lot of engagement. It's hard to keep up. That's better than no engagement though, so it's good. So on our recent poll, should asymptomatic community testing be available to everyone in Hastings free of charge? We had a 90% yes vote on that, 3% no, and then 7% don't know. So that's quite an interesting big vote for yes there. Got loads of questions coming through on the chat. A really interesting one from Polly Gifford. Represented here are 4 different geographies that each have an impact on Hastings: the County Council, the Borough Council, Parliamentary Constituency and LEP. Has this rather complicated jigsaw helped or hindered the response to the pandemic in the borough? Interesting point. There you go. Thanks for that, Polly.
And knowing Polly, I'm not surprised at the question at all, because she's always on point. Okay, Kim, it's over to you.
Yeah, so question 3. Didn't manage to actually turn my page round, excuse me. Question 3 is a question from someone who'd like to remain anonymous, but calls herself Lady Who Lives in Orr Village. And the question is quite a heartfelt question, very altruistic. What support will be given to workers in care homes and professional carers who have experienced the trauma of care home residents dying of COVID whilst in their care? Many of those carers are also contracted COVID themselves. What PTSD-based support and long-term recognition will these undervalued professionals be given? It seems that because they mainly work for private companies or charities, they are being neglected. And I would like to head that out to Steve Manwaring.
Just let you know you're on. That's it. You've got to unmute.
Steve, you're on mute.
Okay. I'd like to start with a comment, which is to say, I hope that one of the things that this pandemic has proved is how undervalued for many, many years the social care sector has become. And maybe one of the lessons we need to actually draw from this is actually putting that right. And I think it is important to say that there was a recent survey that recognised that those people in the front line have mental health issues of their own, and many people are exhibiting exhaustion, problems around their own resilience. And I think the next phase should be a real recognition that people in care settings run by small employers don't have access always to the kind of occupational therapy and support that are available in larger settings. And what we need to be thinking about is actually how we redress that imbalance. And I think there are all sorts of things that can be done. There are services that people can access, but it is important to acknowledge the real trauma of people in the front line, but also the trauma that's been experienced by carers and by others who are supporting. I had the experience of speaking or giving a eulogy at a funeral during COVID, and the experience was absolutely heartbreaking, where people have to decide which family members can come because it was very limited. And I think that will be leading to a real recognition that we need to give attention to mental health. There are services available currently, but my view is that in social care, we need to actually be using the next phase to actually build in a whole range of support mechanisms to actually address that in a more comprehensive way.
I'm just wondering, coming back to you on that point, whether there should be a kind of centralised point where people know that they can go to find out where these services are available. Some of them are very specific. Maybe, you know, HVA has these, and I think part of the question is very much about not whether they should exist, but whether they do already exist and people can tap into them.
Yeah, and I think part of that is actually about how we make available things when people don't need them, so that they're aware of them should the need arise. And I think what we would want to do is to be working on the whole information and communication strand across the whole system, so that people do not suffer in silence, unaware that a service that could really help them is actually available. And certainly the Carers Centre in East Sussex and some of the other provision are actively engaged in this agenda. But I think it's one of those things that more can always be done. And I think one of the things I hope that this experience tells us is that prevention is always better than cure. And if you can actually access interventions early and systematically, it's always a better route to go to keep people in work, to keep people healthy, and to recognise that this has been a traumatic experience for lots of people in the front line.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for that. I do think that it needs to be widely looked at, that there are avenues for people to follow if they do need this kind of added support that people are sort of building at the moment. And hopefully through things like this, with added communication, we can find access to that support for those people. So that's really useful, thank you. Would anyone else like to comment on this from the panel? Sally-Ann Hart, followed by Colin.
Thank you, Kim. I'm just saying that, you know, it's been incredibly difficult for many people over the past few months, and particularly for those people in the care working staff and NHS teachers and everything else. And I think it's really important that organisations that are dealing in the front line there do have a supportive work culture, and they give their staff that support. So there's an openness, people have room to discuss, they might be able to talk about things afterwards. And I think it's important that that culture is developed so that the staff feel well supported and that they're being listened to by their employers.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's super important. And can I follow that up by Keith Glazier?
Sorry, I jumped Colin, but
sorry. Yes, it jumped up in my list. I'm sorry about that.
I'm sure Colin will wait. I just wanted to say that I think it was highlighted very early on that these are many individual businesses across the whole of East Sussex, and predominantly around Hastings as well. One of the things that happened very early on in the pandemic is that the government asked the adult social care team to link more closely with all of the care homes, and they have weekly phone-ins, weekly reports We actually, on some occasions, have put East Sussex County Council staff into care homes where they've had their carers off, either self-isolating or with COVID. But what it has actually told me is that working as a team across the whole of the area and having that support that Steve spoke about is really, really important. And I think through the Care Homes Association, which the majority of our care home providers belong to, I think it's something that we can pick up on and build on, because I actually think something as dramatic as the pandemic has brought people together. It has highlighted some issues that really do need to be brought to the fore. I'm convinced that collectively we can fix that.
I think that's a really important comment, because some of the things that have been very divisive in our society, and some things that have been about isolation and people being on the sort of outskirts, are being addressed because of things like this, and the pandemic has sort of brought that to the fore. Can I go over to Councillor Colin Fitzgerald?
Thank you. I think they made some really good points, but I would like to also pick up. I wish I shared the same level of optimism around some of this, and I'm afraid I don't. And one of the reasons I don't is because the thing that's missing from the conversation is resources. I think that the price that frontline staff have had to pay in terms of their well-being and in terms of what they've had to face up to has been enormous. And I'm not convinced that at the moment we are resourcing our social care system, or indeed the staff, to get the care that they need. Steve's right to point them in the direction that he is, and make sure that they know what's available and what's out there. But this is more than just a culture. This is about making sure that you resource people so that they can get the support that they're going to desperately need at the end of this, whenever that will be. And I think what people have had to face up to, and what the care industry has had to face up to, has been absolutely massive. And you really cannot underestimate that. And it's fine for us to all talk while we're in the middle of the pandemic around how brilliantly everybody's worked. But actually, what we will be judged on, I think, as politicians and as people that are trying to organise things, is how we respond to this afterwards and what we provide for people afterwards. And at the moment, I'm not seeing a plan that gives me great hope that the structures for social care that we so desperately need are going to be resourced in the right way.
Well, I think we're going to have to move on from that one, because I think we could probably spend the entire evening talking about that particular issue.
I think maybe we do have just one. Dawn Dublin did want to just interject.
Okay, fair enough. Yep, no, absolutely fair enough. Yep.
All right, thanks. I was going to say, it's an interesting point, but I think we haven't even considered the fact that there are a lot of agency staff who work in the care sector. And so the idea of having a culture of care would be really lovely. And in the regular situation, I would say that that's, regular setting, I would say that's a good thing to have. But we have a lot of big companies who are running sort of, the care sector, and there are a lot of agency staff who I still don't believe are valued nearly enough. And so I think, when you see people dying on a daily basis, and then you have to leave and go home and come back to that because you need that job, because you can't afford not to have that job, the idea of needing that PTSD support afterwards is really important. And it's something that we really need to think about right now, and try and understand, well, what are those needs? Who do we need to speak to understand how we support those people? Because at the moment we're 1 year into this pandemic and we haven't resolved that issue, and it's really crucial we try and work that out soon.
Yeah, and I think this is vital, and this is about resilience and recovery, and also about people being very tired and people being subjected to huge amounts of work over a certain amount of time that is now getting to be a very long time. So it's all really important, and including, of course, the fact that kind of resilience and recovery and respite for people that have been working through that time needs resourcing as well. So
can I make one extra point there, Kim, which is just to say, I think Colin and Dawn make a really important point, And if you want an example of how fractured the system has become, care workers who work for agencies had to take on a legal challenge to be paid for the time that they take to transport themselves between care appointments. They actually had to take on a legal challenge to be paid, not just for the time they spent with clients, but their travel time. And that just should not be the case. So if we are serious about valuing carers, if we are serious about the contribution they make, that is ultimately an issue of terms and conditions, that people actually feel valued, feel supported, don't have to rely on other support to make their kind of weekly means run through the week. But the idea that people didn't get paid for the travel between patients is just an example of how fractured the system has become.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to move on if that's all right, because we have got a lot of questions here, and we've also got a lot of questions being posed in the question and answer section, which people can contribute to as well, which is becoming very lively as well. So we're going to have a lot more questions than we can possibly answer this evening, but we will endeavour, just to let everybody know, we will endeavour to send everybody's questions on to the right source, and we will endeavour also to make sure that that people have an opportunity to respond to them, and that we can perhaps get some sort of response to individual questions as they come forward offline. So moving on, however, we do have to, we have got a program to run, unfortunately. So we have got some other questions as well, which we want to ask. And this is actually not unrelated to the question which was asked before, which is about special education needs young people. This is a question from Sandra from All Village, where she says that special education needs young people have suffered huge gaps in their educational and increased mental health issues as a result of the COVID pandemic. Many of these families have had no respite and have suffered complete isolation by having all clubs stopped and the inability of family offering their help due to the need for self-isolation. Will extra support be provided to them through the summer, as outlined by the government, with funding for summer schools, etc., to bring them some comfort and reassurance through the long summer break? So I'd like, first of all, I know that we're going to have a number of people that would like to answer this first of all. In terms of the service provision, I think that Keith Glazier might be the first person to respond, but I suspect that Sally Ann Hart and Steve Mannering as well might well have some points to make, but please do contribute if you feel that you need to as well. So, Keith.
Thank you, Alistair. And it's a very good question. I think we would all agree that education of our children is most important, and special educational needs specifically. You know, our children are suffering across the piece. On the specific question, I know that there's adverts out currently looking at people to run summer clubs. There is a lot of work going in, but of course we are still in a position where the pandemic has not gone away, and we still need to be sure that we can get enough people in to run these clubs. And that's the real issue that we've had, because the bit around primary schools and whatever before the lockdown was really about the staff transmitting or children transmitting the disease to the staff, and then not having enough staff or whatever to run the schools safely. So I'm convinced, and Sally Ann will say a bit more about the funding that's going to be made available. I'm convinced that with a lot of effort on behalf of the Children's Services Department and the communities, because let's face it, I come back to, I know there was some skepticism about what this has done, but actually I've been around a lot of these areas virtually as well as physically, and the community spirit is there. So we just need to harness some of that and get some of the people that we will need to run these clubs up, protected, vaccinated and ready to go. So I'm with the questioner. Yes, I think the funding will be available. It's now getting the human resource in place to make that work.
Perhaps I could then come to Sally Ann for some sort of response on that one as well, because obviously it's about making sure that government's funding is coming through to the agencies that are responsible for then delivering the services.
Yes, no, I completely understand about the anxiety and frustration that people with special educational needs and their families are feeling right now. And as Vice Chair of the APPG for Special Educational Needs and Disabilities, we've done an inquiry this year, and we've heard some really sad stories of people not getting the support they need, and their normal support structures are not there. And I think it's really important that, we face and we recognise the struggles and challenges that families and people with special educational needs have had. And having done that work with the APPG, I know that there are issues that have been raised, and we'll continue to lobby ministers to make sure that those issues are addressed. I know that in terms of, we sent a letter recently to the Department of Education expressing our concern that the much needed review into special educational needs has been delayed because of the pandemic. So we really want that to get sorted. But there will be funding. I'm confident that, that we will be able to provide the funding. The government's announced over 42 million for projects this year next to raising educational standards, improving services, and providing the practical support to children with special educational needs. It is very vital that that support is given. In terms of the holiday funding, we've got the holiday activity programme. Some councils extend that out to all children, whether they've got special educational needs or not. Some are specific for special educational needs sometimes. So I think that that funding is there. The government has provided a new advice helpline and increased funding to local parent forums, carer parent forums, to support how councils provide local services and improve training for educational staff in working with children and young people with those particular needs. And it is something that we need to work on, and we need to be better at it.
Can we pass that over to Graham Peters after? Thank you, Sally. Or should I call you Sally Ann? Sorry, I feel really rude saying so. But pass it over to Graham Peters.
Yes, just really quickly wanted to say there is, of course, some funding already here. I'm privileged to be part of the Hastings Opportunity Area, which was a Department for Education fund set up about, 3.5 or so years ago. And sorry, I am unmuted, am I?
Yes.
Yes, you are unmuted.
Yes, you're in the room.
Strange messages on my screen. It's kind of very long story short. So there is funding which will, subject of course to it being able to spend it, available for summer holiday activities, particularly focused on the most deprived children in town, and that will include looking carefully at special educational needs children. We do have representation from that sector on the board. So there is stuff which will already be happening. There can always be more to occupy our children. Those enrichments and challenges that they get from those summer activities are absolutely crucial, particularly in these really difficult times. Thank you.
Can I just ask if there is a place where we can look for those resources if we're someone that would want to find them?
No. I'll give you the link after Kim to send around to people.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's move on. Thank you.
We've got one last comment there from Steve Mannering.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to make a couple of points, because this debate tonight is about the pandemic, but this debate is about the future as well. And I did want to talk about people with disabilities in both those contexts. I think when the history of the pandemic comes to be written, I think some of the experiences of people with disabilities will be amongst the most shameful bits of that history, in terms of some of the experiences that they have had. But I did want to actually say that, yes, we're talking about provision, yes, we're talking about extra resources, but at the end of the day, we need to be talking about life chances. And if I was to say that if you have learning difficulties, those people who are of working age, the actual number of people who actually have jobs is about 8%, which gives us an unemployment demographic of 92% within that cohort group. And I'm saying that if we're serious about talking about recovery, we have to be talking about jobs and life chances for people over time, as well as educational provision, because after 19 there is a cliff edge, and I think people with learning difficulties are just as much part of our economy as the rest of us. And I think that's an argument we should be putting with real vigour, because at all parts of the economic cycle, people with disabilities experience really harsh levels of unemployment and harsh experiences getting into the job market.
Thanks, Steve. I wonder if it might not be a good idea to go over to our chat rooms right now and ask Trina and Rachel and Megan to give us a bit of an update about what's going on in the chat rooms and some of the polls, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. So, hi, we've been looking at the question of are carers and healthcare staff getting adequate support? And we put that poll out to our audience. And 61% said that the support had not been at an acceptable level. And I think what's even more shocking is that just 3% felt that it had. So we also had a comment in, again, talking about NHS care workers from Jim, who said the lack of support for the care sector and NHS workers has been a national scandal. No pay rise, little respect. The levels of trauma being experienced must be off the scale, and counselling and support should absolutely be available in an in-depth and on a long-term basis. A question that we have in relation to that is, should local councils be responsible, should carers and healthcare staff, particularly in care homes, should care homes be operated now by local councils, or should we take care homes out of private sector? Do you think that we should have local councils looking after them instead to ensure that they get prioritised?
Gosh, well, that's an interesting biggie. I wonder, just a quick comment, if I might, just to put that one to Colin from a local government perspective, and see what you say.
We'd be very happy to have a role in that, and particularly if we were funded properly for it, which I think would be a major issue. I think what's interesting about the care sector more generally is that you've got a lot of people exiting the care sector currently, and the reason they're exiting mainly is because it's much more difficult than it was to be profitable. And I'm not sure that model was the best model by which you provide care for people, particularly older people. And I don't think that, as I said earlier, we've yet got to a point where we've looked properly at our social care structures and whether or not they're fit for purpose in the 21st century, and whether or not we are providing what we need to provide. So actually what I think is required is a major overhaul of that infrastructure. I think it needs to be much more united and put together with the NHS, and looking much more at how those two sectors work together. And I would like, unsurprisingly, you won't be surprised to hear me say this, I would like to see it properly funded. With the proper funds, be more than happy for councils to step in.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I'm not going to open that one up to wider discussion, because I think that it's a supplementary question, but over to you, Kim.
Yeah, no, I don't think we have time, and it's really interesting hearing those things, because I think that we'll have a really sort of heartfelt response about funding, but also about resources, and also how we have that sort of joined up approach about all the services that everyone offers. But so this is question 5, and this comes from someone who wants to call himself Steve from St Leonard's. In March 2020, Rishi Sunak promised he would do what it takes to support business. The support has been outstanding, but some businesses are atypical. Why has Hastings Borough Council been so much slower than others in agreeing support for sustainable businesses that pay all their VAT, national insurance, PAYE and corporation taxes, but don't have commercial property. Restart plans have been expensively dashed by lockdowns. Some timely support would be welcome. And I think Colin and Sally, that's over to you, but let's go with Colin first and then Sally after that. Thank you.
Thanks. Obviously, I'll talk from the sort of borough's point of view. I think it's important to point out that we've had 14 different grant schemes, I think, at the last count so far. One was only open for a day. And our officers have worked tirelessly to make sure that we get those schemes out. So in terms of previous local business support schemes, I'd argue strongly that we've not been slower than anyone else on getting those out. I think the latest one, the additional restrictions grant, has come in, and it's come in with a lot more money, £2.6 million, I think it was. But that's meant that we've also needed an entirely new scheme to be developed just at the point where our Chief Financial Officer is also taking care of budget and related government returns. So the department that takes care of that has been under extreme pressure, and I would like to take the opportunity to applaud the amount of work that they're doing. But what we will have is a new scheme, and as has been sort of hinted at, what that will do is it will provide a much wider range for non-property businesses, basically as long as they can demonstrate a sort of 30% loss of business in the previous year. So that's what we hope to do, and we hope to get that in place and up and running by next week. We've had to think seriously about what that will look like, and that's the work that's been undertaken. I do appreciate that if you are a business, you're eager to get that money as quickly as possible, and I'm not for 1 minute underestimating the pressures and stresses that some of our local businesses have been under, and I think the way that they've been throughout the whole pandemic has been absolutely extraordinary. But yeah, that's where we're at, and we would hope to get that out very, very soon.
Okay, thank you. That's really good. Unfortunately, Sally Ann, I'm going to bypass you and take us on to the next question because it's directed at you and we're running out of time. So over to you, Alistair. Thank you very much, Colin.
Okay, thanks, Kim. I know that everybody wants to come in on a lot of these things, and we've got a lot of questions also from in the chat rooms as well. We will, as I say, we will endeavour to get most of them responded to, if not during the live broadcast. This is a question directly for you, Sally, if that's possible. Sally Ann, rather, if that's possible, which is a question from Ellis from Hastings, which is, why did Sally Ann Hart let her community down by voting against free school meals for the most vulnerable children? So over to you, Sally Ann. Perhaps if you can give us your view, your response.
Well, I think I have to say that I didn't vote against free school meals. Don't let a good story get in the way of the facts. Of course, I support free school meals programme. With my colleagues, we voted against a political stunt. It was an opposition motion, which actually is ineffectual whether you vote for it or not. And the holiday voucher scheme was brought in as a temporary measure to support children who couldn't get to school because of coronavirus. I felt that our policy was better for children and families. We have a huge pot of funding, 170 million COVID winter grant scheme to support children, families and the most vulnerable over winter. We've got a holiday activities and food programme, which was extended this time to cover Easter, summer and Christmas going through into 2021. We've got Healthy Start payments, which are free vouchers for those people who are eligible, whether they're pregnant or have children under 4 and they're in receipt of benefits to spend on milk, veg and fruit, etc. And that was given a raise as well. And we have a suite of measures to help tackle poor health, hunger and education. I think we do need to do a lot more for local families and children than the provision of free school meals. And the government departments have been really looking at this across departments, because it really is about looking at the causes of poverty. And that's what we've really got to work on. There's no point just giving out free school meal vouchers when we actually have to stop poverty and really look at what those causes are. So I think when you're looking at the Department of Education, the DWP, DEFRA and the Department of Health and Social Care, they've done holiday hunger pilots. We've had the universal credit uplift. and the DWP is currently working on a poverty strategy. We've had the National Food Strategy from the DEFRA, and Department of Health and Social Care is working on improving the take-up of the Healthy Start scheme vouchers. I think the holiday activity and food programmes have been running for about 3 years, and they've been extended now throughout England for this year. There's no doubt that the pandemic has caused horrendous disruption and hardship. And since the start of the pandemic, we have introduced various measures to help those families most disadvantaged and vulnerable. But I have to stress that we have got to look at the causes of poverty and actually stop those from happening. It's about prevention. It's about giving people the tools to get a good job, and so that they can actually, you know, they don't face poverty.
Okay.
I think we also have to be careful here with blaming poverty on the poor, but we do need to move on. I think that we are going to look in some of the following questions about how we combat deprivation in Hastings. So Al, over to you.
Okay, yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right, Kim. We do have to move on because this one is actually also about poverty. It's about regeneration. This is actually an anonymous question from the Old Town, but nonetheless it's valid, which is, despite countless initiatives, strategies and millions of pounds of regeneration funding, deprivation in Hastings has got worse and now potentially disastrous with COVID. The town centre, for example, will be very different when this crisis passes, with major retailers disappearing. Do the panel really think that we have the right approach, the right structures in place to turn the town around? And if not, what would they change? So I'd like to ask Dawn, if I could, to come in on this one to start off the discussion, because I know that you're involved with Hastings Urban Enterprises and quite a number of other organisations that are involved in the regeneration of the town.
Hi, yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I do think that it's a problem that we're still using the word sort of deprivation. Like, I've been here 15 years, and when we first moved here, that word was being bandied about quite a lot, and I know that it was being used a lot before that. And I think at this point now, we should have already moved on from that. And if we haven't, then we have to question why that's not happening. I think for sure the projects we're working on is more about sort of community-led regeneration, you know, that with an understanding that actually the communities have more expertise in sort of understanding what their neighborhoods need. And we're just not consulting with them enough. And we need to put more power into the hands of communities and have a sort of power balance, really. We've got lots of empty buildings, and we could be putting more people into those buildings. We have an amazing creative community who could be taking on some of these big buildings that we have, the likes of sort of Debenhams and Peacocks, to create these sort of creative workspaces and studios, you know, to revitalize, but from the ground up. The problem we have far too often that it's a top down, and this moment has already shown us that we shouldn't be thinking that way. That way has been wrong, it's been flawed. And when we talk about systems change, this is a moment where we can do that, where we can say, actually, we need to feed into that community expertise. We need to speak to the different creatives and the different small businesses who have been left out for far too long, and just try and work out how together we can sort of galvanize that support and try and come, you know, work out ways to repurpose these buildings. We're just not doing that enough. And I think, you know, a lot of people have you know, really good thoughts about how to create this regeneration, but they're still trying to make decisions for people who are most impacted, and they're not including those people in the decisions at all. And that's what we have to change.
Your point very well made, actually, Dawn, I think, and I'm sure that Graham Peters might have a view. I know that you've been involved in the town investment plan, and obviously from the South East Local Enterprise Partnership, you have a view across the wider business community. So Graham, over to you.
I'd probably have a slightly heretical view. So much of regeneration is about capital funding. That's fantastic. We need to improve our infrastructure. We need to adapt buildings, some of them in the way that Dawn's talking about. There are also businesses out there that give very good jobs that need brand new B1 industrial space, and that's part of the town investment plan. But it's all about capital funding. And to me, nothing like enough revenue funding comes to really address the deep issues in this town and other places as well, but let's use this town for the moment. So the opportunity, that's one of the reasons I was very interested in engaging with the opportunity area, because that seeks to dive very deep into improving social mobility and giving children better life, young people and children and young people much better life chances at early stages in their lives. If we can get to them at an early age and educate them better and give them better opportunities and more exciting opportunities for education in the further education colleges and the new things that are going to happen there. So Plumpton College is coming to Hastings. East Sussex Colleges Group is going to have a green energy department, a green vehicle department, all these new things. If we can meld those together and use this new capital infrastructure we're creating, then there's a real chance of making a difference. The beacon of hope that I hold out to you is that I was part of a meeting the other day. I can't remember exactly how many funders were on the line, and most of them were government or sort of government, Quango-y sort of organisations, but about a dozen of them were in a room together, a virtual room together, talking about how we move Hastings forward and how we collaborate so that we don't get one pot coming in one direction and one in another. That's not going to take away from any of the things that are going on at the moment, but it will try to integrate better the way that funding and assistance comes to this town. And of course, we do need, as Dawn says, to consult the community all the way along, but not everything can be done by community development. I'm sorry, I'm a filthy old capitalist at heart, really, but very wet round the edges. It does need business, it does need other organisations as well as the community to move life forward.
Well, Alistair, can I just interject before you pass that over? I think a really important point to make is that it's not about consulting the community, it's about the community taking part in the recovery and actually the regeneration of the town, and that's slightly different from consultation. So I'd just like to make that point.
I thought I said that I was a fan of some of the community developments actually going on, driven by the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just want to reiterate that.
Okay.
And I'm sure that Steve actually might well have something to say about that, because he can add the bit of wet around the ears that you, Graham, perhaps might not have. I don't know. Let's see.
But blimey, what a big ticket question. That's the first thing I'd like to applaud. There could be a whole programme in itself. Let me make 3 quick points. One is that I think there's a general acknowledgement that trickle down doesn't actually work and doesn't reach people quickly enough, fast enough. Second is regeneration works well when there is economic development, social development and community development all at the same time. So I think we need to be saying it's not one or the other. When those 3 things come together, you have long-lasting change. And I think we've got an opportunity with both the green agenda and the need for affordable housing to really start to do some things which leave a lasting legacy. Because whenever people talk to me about deprivation, they're talking about the housing opportunities that their kids will have. They're talking about the paucity of accommodation. They're talking about rent levels. And we have an awful lot of people with skills. So I think one of the things we need to do is to change a bit of our thinking that communities in deprived areas, the pandemic taught us how resourceful those communities have been. And they're not people who have issues to be fixed, they're people who have contributions to be made. And I think if we take that asset type approach, we start to look at the whole regeneration scenario in entirely different ways. But it isn't one or the other, it's all of those 3 things working in tandem.
That's great. Thank you, Steve. I've just been given notification by our production team that we've been allowed a further 10 minutes, if people can bear it, to finalize and finish some of the questions. We've got 2 further questions, if I may. And the corollary to the first of those questions about regeneration and development, which is actually a question from Lynn Butterworth from St Leonard's, which is, why does the council plan to build on the Hastings Borough Council, this is, but it has wider implications as well, perhaps to county as well. Why does it plan to build on open ground, fields and greenfield sites, such as the old bathing pool site and Bulverhythe Recreation Ground, ignoring strong local resident opposition to the plans when there are brownfield sites that would benefit from regeneration. So this is a question obviously about the difference between building development on greenfield sites or brownfield sites, all of which have a different impact upon the greening of our town. So let's park that one firmly in Colin Fitzgerald's door, if I may, to start off with. And then obviously, if anybody wants to contribute subsequently to that response, please do come in.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair, and thanks for extending the show as well, because I didn't want to avoid this question. I know it's the whole development down there. I know is raises a lot of passions for a lot of people. Broadly, in the answer in terms of the borough is that we made a commitment through our manifestos, which we were elected on, to invest in West St Leonard's. And you can see that in terms of smaller projects like the Abbey Road steps that we had fixed down into the Coombe Valley Country Park, to some of the developments we organised, such as Aldi. I believe I'm right in thinking that it currently employs a local Tory councillor, so it wasn't all bad, I don't think. And we've also been lucky enough to have the development of things like the health centre. In terms of the old bathing pool site, obviously that's a major regeneration scheme, and it's, you know, our plan is to provide housing and amenities. And we are also benefiting from government funding so that we can minimise the flood risk to the housing development in Ball the Hive. So broadly, what we see that as an opportunity to do, and it kind of touches on what Steve was just talking about, is building desperately needed new homes to accommodate many people that are currently living in substandard housing in our town. Absolutely. And it will also mean that the football pitches there, the changing rooms, the pavilion, the car park at Ball the Hive, they will be replaced with new. In terms of where you build on brownfield sites, and I think that's a really important question, the problem for us as a council is that we don't own any, although technically speaking, the bathing pool site is counted as a brownfield site, but I think that's probably a contentious view. But the fact of the matter remains really that we've got an incredible housing crisis in our town. So last year we spent an extra 900,000 on temporary accommodation. It's not sustainable, and we desperately need this housing. So I think when you're starting to think about how we build on brownfield, the other thing to consider is the fact that we've also got to a situation now in Hastings where the number of homes with planning permission but not being developed is roughly, so development hasn't commenced on these, is roughly 2,000 homes, which is an enormous amount of homes just sitting there. And that's a national issue because we do not have the capabilities under the current CPO systems, which are not cost neutral for a start, to unlock these sites so that we can benefit the rest of our town. So at the moment, you've also got a serious land banking issue. So it's a many varied and complex issue. But as I said, we were determined to sort of push forward with our commitments around West St Leonard's.
Okay, well, thank you for that. If I may, since you raised something about that very point, I wonder whether Sally Ann, you might wanted to come in on, just on that last point about the limitations that there are that are placed upon local authorities with regard to planning. Now, I know that there have been steps in government that have been mooted with regard to relaxation of the planning laws, but of course that's a double-edged sword in some many people would say. So, you know, what's the word in Westminster?
Well, I think it's really good that we've got this new planning white paper out and trying to change the planning regulations. And obviously the incentive is to use brownfield sites first. My neighbouring MP, Hugh Merriman, we fought quite hard to get the algorithm because the number of new homes that were required to be built for both Rother and Hastings were just too many to be sustainable. And we've got to remember that Hastings has the sea, and it's got, you know, it's sort of sandwiched between East and West Hill here, and then further out there. And you've got the area behind it is surrounded by an area of outstanding natural beauty. So although that's not, doesn't preclude development, it's not as easy, and you've got to maintain that particular area. I think when it comes to Hastings development, we've got some great sites that can be developed. You know, you've got Ashdown House that can be developed, which is opposite Sainsbury's. That would be a really good site. But I am quite surprised actually with, I don't want to be political, but with some of the Labour councillors ignoring the views of local residents on Bulverhythe, which is a level 3 floodplain, and will take millions to put it right before even housing can be built. And the bathing pool site as well. I mean, the residents there are really up in arms, and you know, it's a great opportunity there at the bathing pool site to really look at building leisure facilities so that you can get people coming all the way along Hastings seafront into West St Leonard's there and start regenerating and spending money there, because there'd be an opportunity for local businesses to set up. So you'd really have the whole of the seafront engaged in local facilities.
Could I just interrupt there, because I think that's moving away from what we're talking about, and whether we brought it in about brownfield sites and green sites, so we'll have to move away from there. But what I think we must do is that loads of people have been contacting us in the chat and want to ask questions. I think this does signify that we need to do this question time in maybe a more specific way and get people's arguments about other things, because people obviously in Hastings community have a lot to say. But let's move over to the chat room.
Yeah, it's been really amazing seeing so much engagement. So yeah, we've got a lot of people coming through with a lot of points. Just scrolling through the chat here. If you want to regenerate the local area, you need to concentrate on economic first, otherwise you will not be able to afford to fund the regeneration, which is an interesting point from Rahel. In terms of there was a really great point we had a poll up about the food bank, and Adam made a really, really great point about how actually thinking that community groups and local organisations are best placed to provide the food bank and put that on, but actually they need more funding like centrally coming through to them. And so our poll that we put up was slightly like we said who is best, but actually it's a combined effort with funding coming nationally into the local groups to provide it, which I thought was really, really good. Just jumping back, why are so it's about a question for Sally Ann Hart. Why are we so far behind the national average in vaccinations in the area? Please, can you break down the figure of 7,476 people vaccinated here so far for us? Thank you. And that is from Sharon. I haven't verified that figure, but that's a really interesting point.
I can actually, on that one, I've got the latest figures, and in fact, I don't think we are actually that far behind. In fact, I think we're actually ahead in many cases. But it's not about whether you're ahead or behind. The statistics, the latest statistics are that in the priority groups, 91.9%, which is in East Sussex, which is 37,000 people aged 80 plus have received a vaccine. Between the 75 to 79, so you're talking about 26,645. That's nearly 93%. 70 to 74, 34,000 people. That's 90% again have received their first dose of their vaccination. In the 65 to 69s, you're talking about 50.9%, but they've only just started on the 65 to 69s. And on the clinically and extremely vulnerable adults, you're talking about 15,500 people, and that's 87.8%. So I don't think that in any shape or form can we say that we are behind. I think they're doing an extraordinary job, quite frankly.
Great.
But I think what we have discovered is that we need an extended conversation with everybody about the future and how we engage all our community in that.
Yeah, there's a really great anonymous point here that just says, can Hastings Borough Council learn from this event more, and that how they can engage local people and have them participate in council meetings / discussions and decisions in the future. And I think that's a really valid point to take away from this evening. There's a lot of engagement here.
And I think that that's probably the time that we could probably wrap this up, because I think that we've all learned And what we will do is we will save the chat, and we will actually try and direct some of these questions to the people within that you can see on your screens, and get responses. And hopefully we've got all your email addresses actually, so we've got all your data because you signed up to be a member, to participants in the program, and we will try our best over the course of the coming weeks to respond to every single question and send it to the various people that have been that they've been put to.
I also think that we will do much more specific targeted ideas about how we go through recovery and how we do that with participation of the community. So the main thing here is, don't feel worried if you have given your ideas, submitted questions that haven't been answered, put comments in the chat. We take it all into account, and we will be talking to you and creating more conversations.
On which note, I would like to just say thank you to all our guests. I would like to give them, if there are individuals that would like to make one particular point that they haven't felt that they've made, that they would like to right now, then please raise your hand right now. If not, I will take this opportunity to say thank you very much indeed to all of our panelists for taking the time out. I hope you feel that you've had a reasonable crack at the whip. It's probably a little bit, we're all learning with this program. There are perhaps too many panelists to enable everybody to have a say. I think we've covered a great deal, a range of areas. And I look forward to inviting some of you perhaps to return to another program in due course. And on which note, I would also like to thank all of the participants who've been involved in this. I don't think that this is going to be the last Hastings Question Time. I think it has proved itself as a very interesting forum to enable people to engage with their civic leaders. So thank you very much.
I would like to give the panelists maybe one line, if they would like to say before we close.
Yep. Fair enough. Let's go around the room, and let's invite them as they see it appear on my screen. So, Councillor Fitzgerald, what would your one-liner about this evening would be?
I'm not sure I've got a one-liner. More just a case of saying thank you, actually, Alistair, to you and Kim and the team for inviting us. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity. It's been I've enjoyed it.
Great, Graham. What about you? Have you enjoyed it?
Well, I don't know, more than I would if I'd answered the question you set me, Alistair. My one line is, as far as the town deal is concerned, everybody should know that that's been submitted now, a bid for 28 million quid. And when that comes back, hopefully fully approved by government, there will be endless opportunities for discussion, consultation, working with the communities on all of the projects in various forums and approaches. And we look forward to that interaction very much indeed. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Dawn, perhaps we would like to give your view of the evening, and if there's something in particular, a burning issue that you wanted to just flag.
No, I just think this is a brilliant thing. You know, I work a lot in sort of engagement and participation and sort of social value, and so this is a very needed sort of space so that we can really hear from people in the town. So thank you for including me in that. I would just say that, you know, one of the things that I think is a bit problematic is that we're so used to words, you know, terms like sort of homelessness and food banks and things, and it feels a bit Dickensian. And we have a moment right now, and this is what you're helping to sort of show, is that we have a moment to listen to people and to engage with them more and to include their voices more in these discussions moving forward. I mean, we all together in sort of partnership can help change, you know, the systems, but we can't do it if there's just one group doing it and leaving the others out. So I think there's a moment here we should think about, really.
Thank you
anyway.
Thank you.
That's a really lovely comment. Thank you, Dawn.
Keith, have you got a final closing remark?
Dawn could have actually said what I did. I mean, many people will have heard me speak at council meetings and elsewhere. I genuinely believe that the answers are in this room. And that actually working together, we are much stronger than we are fighting each other. I genuinely believe that, and I really do welcome more of this. I've really enjoyed this evening. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're welcome. Sally Ann, what about your view of the evening?
Thank you, Alistair. It's been really interesting. And my message to my sort of one-liner would be that Hastings and Rye people have been incredible throughout coronavirus. They've worked really hard. We had high rates a couple of months ago. We're now some of the lowest again in the country, and we've just got to keep going. But the community spirit has been fantastic, and the support that organisations like HEART have given to local people has been amazing, and it's been fantastic to see that.
Thanks very much. Greg, how about you?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me this evening. I'm just going to make a quick plug for vaccination, if I may. The vaccination program's been marvellous. It's been great to be part of it. It works. We know it works. It's had increasingly powerful evidence to say it works really well. And for the final 10% of people who aren't getting vaccinated, I would just encourage them, if they're uncertain about whether it's a good idea or not, go and talk to somebody in the vaccination centre. I've had a number of doubters, and they've all changed their minds. They've all been very happy to go ahead with just a little bit of information. There's a lot of nonsense information out there. Just listen and go and get it done. It's our way forward.
Thank you, Greg. And then finally, speaking as we are from a community organisation's point of view, I wondered if the chair of the community hub might like to add his closing remark. So over to you, Steve.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks very much for the event. I think it's been really interesting. There's something I've wanted to say for a while as chair of the community hub, because I have the privilege of seeing some of the hidden wiring of all that's gone on in Hastings, which is to say this last period has been absolutely grim for Hastings in terms of the way the pandemic has affected, and we've seen many, many really challenging things. But I kind of wanted to say, I actually think during this period, we've actually also seen the best of Hastings and the best of that Hastings can offer, and the collaboration that was thrown together at really, really kind of short periods of time that assembled the support to the most vulnerable people in our community. And I just wanted to say there's thousands of people who are part of that kind of network who made that happen. And I just wanted to say, as I'm the kind of person who's been involved with that, just to say an enormous thank you to everyone, some of the people you know, some people you just never ever meet, who made a contribution during that really, really difficult period for our town.
Thank you, Steve. On which merry note, we have to close. It's time to say goodbye to everybody. But if I may, just thank you once again to all of our panelists. Thank you to all of the people that have contributed.
Can I just make...
You can interrupt. Of course you can interrupt. Just make a change.
I'm going to interrupt and always be annoying, as I always am. There was loads of really very tricky, interesting things that people said, and I think they need further discussion. So I hope that the people that came to the discussion today would be happy to carry that on, and we'll give you the feedback, and also to say thank you very much to our chat team with the people that have been contacting the general public. Unfortunately, we wanted it to be a really big part of tonight's discussion, that we actually had those bits of discussion from the public, and we haven't had it enough. So what we might do is have a more focused debate so that those things can be brought out. But please keep being engaged, because it's about organising a community response.
On which merry note, if I may, just to say thank you once again, and good night to everybody. Stay safe, be well, and enjoy your weekend. Thank you very much. Goodbye.